Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah. Okay, now your audio's on, mashallah. Okay, so thank you very much for coming on. Let's get straight to the subject of your studies. Firstly, how did you get interested in this subject?
Yeah, so I got into Islamic psychology gradually, coming from both worlds, let's say. So even before I met Islam, let's say, I was introduced to this. I was deeply interested in psychology and I pursued my academic career in cognitive behavioral psychology and then neuroscience in Germany. And then I got closer to Islam, I became a Muslim, and I discovered there that there was quite a lot to reframe and to say about mental health. And so I sought with all the tools available at the time to get to know more about this discipline. However, in the last 10 years or so, this field has really, really blossomed. And nowadays, when we talk about Islamic psychology, even in the West, in the United States, in the UK, people treat it as an independent discipline as it should be now. So,
all sciences have the science part, but they have the philosophy of science part, which many times people skip over. History even has a philosophy of even reality. It reflects on a person's history, how they're going to view history. So, for example, when it comes to hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, if a historian has a presupposition that naturalism, only physical things can occur, and revelation or prophecy cannot occur, then clearly they're going to view any prophet and their companions as delusional. And that's going to skew everything they say. Okay? But this isn't restricted to history. Science as well. When we study psychology and the human being, there is a presupposition. Like, what exists? Is it just chemicals and neurons? Or does God's revealed word have any truth to it? Is that even possible? And is it true? So we say it's possible, and some of it's true and some of it's not. For example, excuse me, we would say the Bible and the Torah, we can't say is 100% true. So how do you, as a Muslim psychiatrist and a psychologist, navigate your fields, being that all of the educational systems and colleges and universities are literally not accepting a big portion of the truth, which is the idea that God does have his word, and he has said a lot about the human being and what we would call the human psyche, soul, and psychology, and diseases, and the locus of the diseases, which is the heart. So how do you navigate it, knowing that your teachers, basically, in the fields are not accepting a big portion of this truth?
This is an excellent question, but I think that from the outside, Western psychology, let's call it mainstream psychology, seems much more compact epistemologically and ideologically than it actually is. Because what we see in the field is, on the one extreme, we would have neuroscience that has claimed like we're just the activity of our brains, but yet then has failed to provide a coherent answer to, for example, the problem of consciousness, among many others. But then we would have also other schools equally important, for example, like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what most therapists would use, that is very agnostic as to what we are. They're more interested in what works. Is it going to make you feel better? Or we even have schools like psychodynamic schools or others that are less known by name that postulate that there is a lot of hidden stuff inside the human being. So I would say that mainstream psychology does not exclude really anything or does not affirm really anything epistemologically. It is a field which is extremely weak and extremely in a crisis, since neuroscience has not been able to really replicate the mind. And also we can see a failure of artificial intelligence to do anything even closer to the human mind. So that is one step that maybe makes things a little bit easier. On the other hand, the contribution of the Islamic civilization is systematically downplayed in Western academia. So that perhaps is a bigger problem, because in the moment in which we're saying, well, maybe Islamic psychology is another school of psychology because it answers the same questions, what is said back to us is, well, this doesn't even exist, it's not a thing. Psychology was invented in 1876 in Leipzig, in Germany. And so that is actually, in my field, a bigger problem than epistemology, because epistemology right now is non-existent in Western psychology, I would say.
So where is the line in contemporary Western, before we get into what we would say as Muslims, where is the line between behavior and disease?
Yeah, so even to this, there isn't a clear answer, because what we have in our hands as psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, is basically a book, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, that is basically just a list of things, disorders that people suffer from, in no particular order. Actually, the ordering on the diseases in it is a very controversial subject. It is changed at every edition. Now we are at edition 5 revised. In the edition before, personality disorders were different. Things were seen as problematic, and now they're not, and the other way around. So is there a distinction between behavior and disorder? I can't really answer you from the field of Western psychology. Another issue it has is that there are different subfields or subdisciplines in psychology that will use the same term with different meanings. For example, we would talk about a personality disorder. Nowadays, people love this, right? Narcissistic personality, borderline personality. And in it, there are personality traits, which then the psychology of personality does not recognize. So they would say the personality of a person is just like introvert or extrovert, or neurotic or less neurotic. While in the disorder, we find other traits. Do we have this trait also in the normal population? Yes or no? Nobody knows. Are this something that is continuous and everybody has it? We do not know. Is it possible also to reverse it, to manipulate personality? Nobody knows. And this is just one small category, because there is all sorts of disorders, right, in that book. So again, non-conclusive answer, but I think it is also important because psychology really in the post-contemporary world is like the last certainty that people have. So it is very important to understand what it is and the problems it has as well.
Okay, so interestingly, just as a side note, you mentioned a lot of these disorders. When I find a lot of the names of the disorders to be merely descriptions of the symptoms, right? So how is that? Is it just that they haven't figured out the cause? Because usually a disorder should relate to the cause, then there are symptoms. But a lot of disorders is merely nothing other than a description of the behavior or the symptom.
You know what, for a while there was this trend which was called the chemical imbalance theory. And the idea there was that every mental health disorder would be just a consequence of either electrical or chemical activity in the brain being unbalanced. And then systematically this thing didn't work out. For two reasons: we couldn't find it in the brain and we can really have a good look at it from the inside. And the second reason is that medication does not cure everything. And that is the whole huge failure of psychotropic medication, which is a whole another chapter. So these failures brought to a change in perspective. So maybe not everything is strictly neurological. So the only thing that we can do is phenomenologically talk about something which is happening. What are the criteria? Basically, is that it is not normal, so it's not what the majority population does. It is maladaptive, and it limits a person's functioning. So this is the only criteria that mental disorders right now have in common. And we could talk a lot about it. Cultural sensitivity to this, individualism as a view of mental health, and the relationship to productivity as well. These are very critical points. There is no meaningful descriptor or meaningful cause that would put together all mental health disorders under one category or explanation.
So that seems to be the main reason why the field has a fuzziness or a haziness to it is because the brain cannot be examined like a muscle can be examined or an organ can be examined. And hence, what you mentioned of the chemical imbalances not being demonstrably visible is going to be one of the reasons why it remains theoretical, subjective, speculative, and what we would call in Sharia wahmi, something that's sort of, it's unseen. We're just trying to look at symptoms and guess what it is, theorize what it is. But at the same time, let's hypothetically say we could, and I'm sure for some mental disorders there is a clear chemical imbalance, but just like the physical body, I can have a chemical imbalance that's behavior induced by my eating or my sleeping or what have you, or stress. So likewise, if there's a chemical imbalance in my mind, that could also be induced, right? We don't know. We're theorizing here. It could be induced by my mental behavior, like my thought patterns. I could probably give myself high blood pressure right now by thinking about bad things, right? Without anything else. Just thought is going to impact my whole body. So by analogy, thought should be able to impact mental health. And if you take it so far, you keep thinking certain thoughts and you go so far with certain behaviors, you could bring upon yourself disease even.
Yes, but what neuroscience would tell you is that there is no thought. There's just brain. Yeah. So, and I understand that there is this perception from the outside that the brain is really this mysterious thing you cannot really figure out. I can tell you, having a PhD in neuroscience, you can't. So there are functional, structural, electric. There is a lot of methods to figure out what's going on in the brain. But what's going on in the brain is the brain. Mm-hmm. So it is not the soul or consciousness, is not a lot of things that do need the brain to happen, but are not that. So I would say that here we have a very big gap, because we're not talking about the fact that the brain is difficult to interface with. It is maybe from the side of medication, because of the blood-brain barrier. It's not very easy to get things into the brain. But nowadays, there's a lot of ways to figure out how is your brain made, how is it working, what is not, And in most disorders, there isn't. So by whatever the epistemological how reliable is it? I don't know. But for the methods we have right now, there isn't a chemical imbalance. So all we have is memories that play a huge part in mental health and the processing of these memories, emotions that I do not think are in the brain at all. They are all over the body. And this is quite clear in psychology and neuroscience. And we have thoughts that who knows where they are, right? So these things are what put together most mental health disorders. And for example, I would say generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, or personality disorders, or burnout, or PTSD. These are not primarily chemical. Others are, for example, schizophrenia or others. But, we're just collating together a family of things that just have in common the fact that the aql, the mind, is clouded for some aspects, but we're saying, but there is no mind at the same time. So this is very messy epistemologically, and it's very difficult to work with.
So you're saying essentially that the field of psychology does not have a fixed epistemology.
It does not. It does not. Especially the diagnostic field, you would find, has one epistemology in defining the disorders and finding their neurocorrelates. And then the clinical field has a completely different worldview in treating the person and what is the clinical objective. Imagine if medicine had two different epistemologies on diagnosis and treatment. That would be ridiculous, right? Yeah. Yet we are accepting this in the mental health field. Also adding on top of it the intervention of psychiatry with medication as well. So it's a triangulation which is never going to work.
You mentioned that emotions are all over the body. Could you expand on that? What is that exactly?
Yes, I'm talking from a purely mainstream psychology, neurological perspective. And it is both the observation that emotions are felt in the body, very notoriously, the chest contracting and expanding, cut and bust is something that in our tradition we know very well. And then from the fact that there is also a nervous system activation all over the body, palms sweating or heart rate. So definitely our body plays a role in our mental activity as well. So for example, also in other ways, when we are anxious, we feel small. or feeling light and darkness as metaphors of, mental states, or even the effect of feeling clean or dirty after doing certain actions. So definitely our body is in it. We're not just brains on a stick, right? And this is the wrong message that we give when we use even language that is, oh, my brain is telling me, or I need my dopamine fix. They can be jokes on the one hand, but on the other hand, the fact that this type of language got so common in English and even the layman would use it tells us something, that we have a presumption about who we are that is completely false and cuts out maybe 80-90% of what actually is going on.
Let's shift to the Islamic paradigm and the understanding of how prophets talk about this subject, because we have to go back to the words. The word mind doesn't necessarily even have a translation into Arabic. So let's scrap all of the Western framework and paradigm and build totally from the ground up. When we're talking about, we can't even say the word mental disorder. There is junoon, of course. There is mental illness for sure. So, but there isn't a term psychology. There isn't a term psychiatry. So why don't you guide us along? How would we build this from the ground up? What would the terms be? What would the framework be? What would the purpose be? What would markers of health and sickness be?
Okay, let's get it one thing at a time. Yeah. That's a lot of terrain. But starting from the name of the discipline, right? So the so-called Islamic psychology is actually an English translation of ilm al-nafs, which, again, this is controversial because mainstream psychology, basically what it does nowadays in the West, is a very ugly type of work. So it's on cognitive distortion, the ways you think, the way you see things, it's all in the mind. But ilm al-nafs, it has many meanings in the Arabic culture, but a lot of it is a work on your ego, on your desires, also on your actions. It is much wider encompassing, much more moral as a sort of framework, and one which is integrated with many other disciplines. Namely, for sure, Aqidah, because that's necessary. For sure, all the classical Islamic science, but with a particular focus also on Islamic medicine and tasawwuf.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is really the places where ilm al-nafs takes bits and pieces to then elaborate a theory of health and disease. And we can take from this that it's very similar to what Islamic medicine is. Maybe this is more well known, right? So Islamic medicine has this idea that health is something which is cultivated in our everyday practices, and it is a matter of equilibrium between different components, the four humors, right? And in Islamic psychology, we have something very similar to that. We use the four temperaments to classify people, and then we use the levels of the nafs, classically the 7 levels of the nafs universally known, and then the sicknesses of the heart. This is also something which is quite well known in the Islamic world. And this is about the normal functioning. And then on top of it, we would add also a systematization of disease.
Okay, so you just discussed it from that's the perspective of the human. What about now the sources of knowledge?
Yes, so for the sources of knowledge, Islamic psychology in the classical age has been extremely dependent on the Qur'an and Sunna. Yeah, so this is not something that has been developed as sort of philosophy or a sort of a new discipline. Some authors have a little bit overplayed, for example, the role of Greek medicine on the development of the field. But reality is that the earlier books on treating anything about Islamic psychology, and even if we arrive, maybe the book where we take the most of knowledge nowadays is the Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam Ghazali. Well, we know that book, right? How it is. So in it, and these are the books that treat more the normal functioning on the nafs, because Islamic psychology is not about finding a number of diseases and then everyone has a little bit of that disease. No, we first elaborate a complicated and thorough framework of the healthy human behavior and paths to ascend continuously in it. And then in case there is a disease, this is analyzed one by one. It can be a disease of emotions and it has its own families. It can be a disease of the aql and it has its own families, a disease of the nafs, and so on and so forth, with a more coherent structure. So it's basically a lot of reasoning on primary sources, adding on empirical understanding on what works out with different types of patients in terms, for example, of nutrition, in terms of lifestyle, and so on.
Very good, because we have empirical knowledge in Islam. Obviously, that's a major source, which we call al-ilm al-tajribi, knowledge that is done by trial and error. And then you have the transmitted sources, which would be for us Qur'an and hadith, and then obviously anything that's transmitted soundly, history, language. And then you have your reasoning, which is also important, because sometimes you need to make analogy, you need to analyze things, and the source of that is reason. So now let me ask you, how do you practice? You have an open practice that non-Muslims and Muslims can readily come to? How does it work?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do practice with both Muslims and non-Muslims. However, nowadays there are issues with practicing these if it is done the traditional way. And that means that oftentimes it is not compatible with holding a license in psychotherapy or in psychology, because the things we do they're not very compatible. For example, there can be restrictions in many states, in Europe for sure, about discussing religion or providing religious guidance or applying religious practices and things, for example, adkar or ruqya, which are indeed necessary in this line of work, can be not allowed. So there are difficult choices for sure. This is something that we cannot practice in a field like in a hospital, where traditionally Islamic psychology would be practiced a lot to offer complementary care. So we have to be restricted a lot, and we're restricted to sessions like psychotherapists, but not being in the same category, let's say.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
It's that the entire field of science today, it's really naturalist science. It's not there is no such thing as neutral science, right?
There's not, but I would not even say this is naturalist, because if you look at what many schools of psychotherapy nowadays are proposing, which is just like feel good with yourself, or just let's do some mindfulness without even defining what it is. They're not even trying to sound sciencey. It is just let's get religion out of the way. So it is as blatant as it can be.
Yeah, because when it comes to the body, you could be a pediatrician, a surgeon, etc., and the Qur'an and the Hadith, there's not so much from Qur'an and Hadith about the body, and what it is, or what there is agreed upon. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, there's nothing in the body there's no vessel worse to fill than the stomach. And we know today the stomach is a source of a lot of disease. And so there's no issue for a doctor of the body, a physician of the body, to be whatever belief they have, because it's like 90%, we would say, tajribi. It's demonstrable knowledge. But once we get to the hidden part of the body, which is the mind, the soul, consciousness, feelings, it's so hazy that our understanding of it, as you said, is you're not even allowed to practice it, right? So you're not even allowed to teach by it or to counsel people by it, according to most laws in the Western nations that are built on naturalist science. So, but if you had a Muslim patient, what would your source of treatment be? If I could ask, if that's a very broad question, but let's say you didn't have all these issues and prohibitions on you and laws, how would you treat Muslim patients?
Yeah, so the first thing I can explain is how would I assess, first of all, because I'm not just going to give for granted any book or textbook or diagnosis that has been given before that. So what I would do is, first of all, to figure out what is the level of their nafs, which is very important. And this we know from Tasawwuf, we know from whoever read a little bit on Tazkiyatul Nafs, that a nafs or self at different stages can present very differently. And at a certain stage, there is a certain risk for a certain mental health disorder as well. So for example, anxiety is really the sickness of nafs al-lawwama. So if you find a person who is like that, he's going to be prone to guilt, fear, and anxiety. If you find a person who is instead in nafs al-ammara, we know that they're going to be more prone to emotional dysregulation, narcissism, and so on. So after a while, and this is very empirical because this thing changes with societies and cultures, the way you're going to express the state of your nafs. Yeah, so there isn't a lot of sources, this is more experience. So first you understand what is their nafs. You understand their heart, which is a different dimension, their qalb. So is it sound? Is it sick? Is there any sickness in it? If it, yes, let's cure it. And then you understand the aql. How is this person thinking? Because some people do have very clouded thinking. We do find also problems of thinking being very different between the genders. And this is, again, another taboo that unfortunately in mainstream psychology, we cannot really talk about. And then we would also include their body, because nafs, aql, qalb, jism, and ruh, and the spirit. What is their connection with the transcendence? Once we have figured that out, and so this is done with everyone, symptoms or not symptoms, you're supposed to do this on yourself, on your muhasiba, right? So to figure out where you are in different components of yourself. And then on that, we add on the symptoms. Most times the symptoms can be traced back to one of these components. So most times, for example, an anxiety disorder is traced back to nafs al-lawama, or outbursts of anger is traced back to nafs al-ammara. So we treat the stage of the nafs. We do not treat the symptom. We treat the disease. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a work which is done on that. But then it depends, because sometimes, for example, we have clients with incurable mental health disorder. Incurable meaning we haven't found the cure, not that there isn't, but we don't know what to do. For example, schizophrenia. And then there we focus more on compassion, empathy, closeness, suhba, and this sort of things. So, but still it is in those axes.
So you're first going straight to the person's relationship with his ego, whether or not he indulges it, and that is has a presupposition, which is that the right behavior is through the Sharia. So therefore, you would have to also go into their knowledge, correct? Like they'd have to have some knowledge. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's very holistic, because how you are with your ego relates to what you know, right? Someone could, and then what you know is related to what you believe, which is aqidah. So really, aqidah and sharia, and they really both have a major part to play in how a person behaves, and therefore it's a big part of your assessment. So it's almost intersecting with the work of Shuyukh in a sense.
Indeed, it is. And there are some people that say that actually ilm al-nafs, traditionally, this was practiced in tasawwuf by the Shuyukh. It's just the same thing, because you would have the guy coming and saying, I have a certain problem, and the Shaykh would give me a adkar, or, it's very similar. But nowadays, what we found is that the Shuyukh are few and difficult to find. And so there is some sort of support system to be put in place, especially at the lower levels of the nafs, because the lower levels of the nafs, Ammara and Lawama, but also nafs al-mulhima, it's very tricky. They do need a lot of groundwork, a lot of hours to get out of, many times, a lot of effort. And so you can't expect one of the, like in Italy, what we have 2 or 3 qualified Shuyukh maybe in the whole country with 2 million Muslim population. What are they gonna do? Yeah. So that's why we need the sort of assistant figures, or maybe that have a little bit more practice in the issues that are specific of that culture, or vices that are specific of that environment, and maybe the needs they don't really need to know about. Yeah. For example, we do see some disorders, some personality traits that in one culture are more rampant and are negative, and less so in another. And so this is what Islamic psychology focuses on. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of or read the book about psychiatry and psychology and the testing that was done by Mubarak al-Jilani?
No.
Okay, so he cured by the Qur'an in Saudi Arabia. He went to a psychiatric institution in Saudi Arabia, and he cured various ailments simply by dhikr, basically, by listening to the Qur'an. So a lot of people would have some kind of reaction to that, because they're trained in the physical aspects of or solely the demonstrable aspects of psychotherapy, right? Psychiatry and psychology. So, what would your background tell you about this kind of approach?
Indeed, yeah, that can work. However, in the West, and so I mainly work with European, North American, Australia, Westerner people, minority coming from the Arab world. And most of my clients have a very big spiritual block. And this means that they have gone through, for example, spiritual abuse or types of education which were very misguided by their parents, even with the best intention, or severe community traumas. So for them, the idea, the availability to say, let the Qur'an heal me, they're not ready for that. Mm-hmm. So most of my work is done earlier than that. It's done with people who are like, I don't feel anything anymore when I pray. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I believe anymore, because there are people that feel that in our community, or they're stuck in such horrible levels of sin that they have no idea how to get out of it. And so the heart, which is the place that the door, like Ghazali says, from the inside and outside, if it is not polished enough, it's not even gonna feel to fullness the power of the shifa of the Qur'an. And so you have to have other methods too, to, let's say, prepare them to that level. But I have also seen clients, for example, I have a client that suffered tremendous trauma and abuse from her family, and for her we developed a relationship through Surah Yusuf that was so healing for her, and she did basically the surah did all the work, all the therapeutic work that was there to do. And I have many other cases to this extent, but there are some people that are not ready for that.
Well, why is it that Surah Yusuf in particular relates to healing and therapy?
So most people, the way they can develop a relationship with the Qur'an is mainly through the stories that are told there, because there are so many levels in the book. And some levels, when you are overwhelmed by emotions and overwhelmed by anxiety, you don't get it. It's closed. Everything is closed. You have to keep in mind that the more you are emotionally unwell, the less even your intelligence can really shine through. So things that could be understood at other levels, meanings, tafasir, and so on, they're not accessible right then. So just the flow of the story is what can be taken out of a surah most of the time, together with, of course, its shifa and its barakah. And that is why sometimes in Islamic psychology, we tend to favor surah that tells stories or that would talk in symbols about the situation closer to the client at the beginning. And then it is possible to go also to other parts.
Okay, it's you said that some people are not ready for certain treatments because they don't have for various reasons. So therefore, you'd have to go back and do a lot of the talking, which is, I think, most people when they think about therapy, they think about the couch and the talking. So guide us through the basics of that, because a lot of times it's a little bit, there's some cliches and some, you say stigma, that people just go and sit on the couch and complain, and this person's billing them, right, for basically just listening. So unpack that cliche and expound a bit about the talking that has to happen when you treat a patient.
Yes. So in general, in Islamic psychology, I'd say that there is as much talking from the therapist as there is from the client. So the main skill is not listening, definitely. What we're doing in a session is typically going through the steps that Al-Ghazali describes in the Kitab al-Muraqaba of the Ihya Ulumuddin. So we're setting an objective, and for the next session or couple of sessions, what we want to achieve, explaining the client what we're trying to achieve, and then we're going to work through it. There are different ways of working through it. There can be a sort of muhasaba, so understanding the real weight that this thing had in their life. There can be a sort of muraqaba, so cultivating awareness inside of the person of what's going on. But we also do other sort of things. So for example, mushahada, like witnessing the thoughts and figuring out if this person is distorting reality in the way they're thinking about it. these things even mainstream psychology knows about, like, positive thinking or personalization or emotional reasoning. But when these things are only taught about from mainstream psychology point of view, that is, let's just think positively for the sake of thinking positively, they're not very powerful. But when this is connected together with the wider objective that the person wants to achieve, to their meaning in life, to very powerful positive concepts such as tawakkul and qadr and so on. So this is very aqidah infused, that what you're trying to do is basically make a person accept either their past, through this sort of tools, or their current situation, or straightening up something that they got wrong around the way. So it is a lot of education. It is a lot of me taking notes and then figuring out where is the knot in this whole situation. And then trying to explain, trying to propose exercises to think about it, then through the couple of weeks that usually go between one session and another, and really train until they're ready to do the real work, because the real work is nafs work. So it's work on your ego. It's not work on the thinking mind. But sometimes if the mind is too distorted, you can't even understand what you're doing or who you are. Zero analysis capability. So you have first to go through that. Of course, it's an emergency.
Are all emotions valid?
Oh, well, that's a difficult question.
That's a controversial question.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why it's controversial, because while you process your answer, I'll just expound a little bit. Okay. A lot of times in our Western society, there's a type of epistemology or belief that all emotions are valid. But the way a lot of other people grew up, you needed to have a reason for your emotion. Okay. There needed to be a valid reason for emotion. For example, if a person was to accidentally mispronounce a person's name, right? Then you get offended. But then you discover the person actually truly just made a mistake. Then you remain to be offended is an invalid emotion. Okay? You can't be offended anymore once you know something is an accident. Or, for example, something's not your right. It's not your right, for example, to be lauded and celebrated by everybody. So that when you walk into a room and nobody lauds you or celebrates you, then you feel slighted. That also would be an invalid emotion. Right?
Yeah, I understand. I think there is a difference here that has to be made between emotions that are very raw data that arrives to us. And there's this basic emotion, right? Anger, joy, sadness, disgust. And these are valid, meaning just we're feeling it like you would feel any discomfort in our body, just in a different plane. But there's still two things on it. There's still moral responsibility. So it doesn't mean that since I'm feeling something, then I'm allowed to do something else, or it is right to do something else. And this is, when people realize this, it solves half mental health disorders, because people are always, I need to do something to get out of this discomfort. So I get angry, I get OCD perpetuates on this, by the way, because I feel discomfort of the thought, so I need to do the compulsion, and so on and so forth. If people just cultivated hilm, the capacity to increase gradually what they can bear, you could feel all emotions. But it's emotion. They come, they go. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge of your hearts. There's qabd and bast, contraction, expansion. This is all valid. This is all true. But it doesn't necessarily mean something, nor does it put your nafs at the center of the universe, right? So I think that both binaries here, this has to be framed perhaps a little bit differently from our understanding. There is definitely validation, because the ruh, the spirit, is something very sensitive to anything. And you might even see a butterfly and feel an emotion that is valid. There's no reason. But, at the same time, does it mean I have to act, or no? Yeah.
So here you're actually entering into a different space, because emotions in themselves, which was the question I previously asked, but you also mentioned something else. You mentioned just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act upon it. Now, this is extra psychological. It's not psychiatry. It's not psychology or psychiatry at this point. That's like beliefs. And that's
it's
literally...
But it is nafs.
Yeah. So I feel something. How do I react to that? That's now you're entering into morality. beliefs and law and all that stuff. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, this is actually something that lately, in the last 10, 15 years, even mainstream psychology has not shied away from. If we look at the whole field of acceptance and commitment therapy, this is a school that is based on cognitive behavioral plus Buddhism, basically, right? And their idea is that you need to have strong values, and these strong values need to guide you, and you need to be coherent between what you're doing and your mental inside life. Mm-hmm. So it seems that psychology has understood that you can't just be in the mind to feel good. Yeah, it's not all about perception, but the way you also then act in life. And actions, they're not just external, they can be internal too. Yeah, so for example, I'm feeling anger. Am I allowing it to ruin my day? That's also an action. So it is a complete control on this part of us, which is the nafs. So, of course, this gets also into morality, and that is where it is very difficult to work with people that have completely different worldviews than the one of the therapist in Islamic psychology. But I think that this is really a step without which any therapy is eventually useless, because if it's not going to help you with navigating day-to-day life and your problem is psychological, so it's related to that, then what is it for?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned spiritual blockage. Could you elaborate on it, and how would you undo it or remove that crust from a person?
Yeah, so a spiritual blockage it's a situation in which a person is feeling something towards the spiritual world, whether it is the practice of Islam, whether it is their understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is not allowing them to further progress or to get out of the state in which they are. And usually this is a hurtful state. So one example that I would make is very common in our community. And it would be a person that grew up with parents that really insisted on them praying so they wouldn't go to hell. That's it. No other motivation given. So this is an idea of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly punishing and based only on fear. And as we know very well, the wing of hope needs to be present too for the bird to fly. So this is somewhere the block can be taken away with a reconstruction, maybe a work on the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or an understanding in Aqidah. And so there are these things. It is between emotion and belief. It is a specific area, the one of spiritual block. Or sometimes it can be a person growing up in the West where they associated being religious to everything is forbidden. So they see, oh, Islam is so heavy, Islam is so constricting, and they only see one side of the picture. Mm-hmm. And so then there would be you bringing the side of mercy, and you bringing the ways in which this system is really working out for their well-being as well. So these things are incredibly common, however, in our community, especially because they're so taboo that so many people have them and they will never talk about them. So I see them a lot in my space because it is a very private and confidential space.
Talk to me about the benefit of service towards others in mental and spiritual and emotional health.
Yes. So, service is really one of the things that are always advised in case of ilm al-nafs, and it's really one of the keys to master for growth between the levels of the nafs. The nafs is very self-referential and it is very self-centered, especially nowadays in the West with the idea of individualism. And there are usually two, I use together khidma and service and sadaqah very much together in my therapy as advices that I give to people. Because the Western society gives you two main ideas. Your money is just yours, not even give 10 euros to your parents that are starving or not even anything. And your time is yours. So work and entertain yourself. Yeah. So these are the two pillars of your life. And this is so dysfunctional that really the only way sometimes to get unstuck on that is service. And service has to be real service. It doesn't have to be a hobby, because many people get this wrong. And they say, yeah, I will become like an activist on whatever cause because I like it, or because we have to watch out because otherwise we're still following our passions and we're still, doing this sort of thing. So the question of khidma is what is needed right now around around me. So it can be my parents, my neighbors. It's really service for the sake of service, and that is definitely needed. Yeah.
What is it about doing service that heals a person on the inside?
Well, I think it is several aspects. One aspect is, of course, it's comparison for many people. Yeah, because people are used to compare themselves to idealized standards that they see on Instagram and don't even exist. And so when they actually, touch grass and interact with actual human beings, they're gonna see that, life is not greener on the other side. This dunya is difficult, and that is one thing that service really teaches you. And the other thing that service teaches you is that, Allah's rahmah is really everywhere. And when you're a tool of it, you really see that it's all around you. And this bleak, doomed vision that many times people have of being no remedy to some situations, little by little, they see that in reality it's not like that. People get helped all the time. People get facilitated and help arrives to them. So it's many things, yeah.
We as Muslims hold that the body and the nafs, they're intertwined, almost as if the nafs is infused in the body, with the exception of the white part of the nail and the hair, which you can cut without feeling anything, and that's why, because that's the only part that's not connected. That being said, therefore, what about people's anxieties, feelings, habits, even addictions, also being rooted in the body, and what they eat, how they exercise, how they sleep, and everything purely physically related. Like we previously mentioned the spiritual factors on belief and those things. What about the purely physical factors that could be changed, and therefore you see a very good mental and spiritual and emotional results?
Yes, these are many. Unfortunately, many we cannot use right now. And I will explain how. I was recently in Damascus, and there was the Bimaristan Nuri there, which was one of the places where Islamic psychology was born. And we're talking before the year 1000 of the current era. And if you look at this beautiful structure, you will notice, for example, that and that was for mental health disorders as well, right? So it's not a generic hospital. You would see, for example, a care for the beauty of architecture. And I know this sounds like it is not related to mental health, but it is, because the big physical structure that is around our body, the proportions of it are important. So if we live in these horrible, moldy apartments and in very small rooms with not good air, that's going to have an effect. In Islamic hospitals, there used to be an attention where it was built depending on the air, as we well know in Baghdad. Yeah, that was the case.
No, I didn't know this. This is new to me.
Yeah, air quality, architecture quality. Then, of course, food. Yeah, so we would use, of course, Tibba Nabawi as well. That's very important. And as well, a type of diet which is very light, not very processed, not overfilling the belly at specific times. And then every culture in which Islamic psychology and medicine arrived had a different flavor of how to improve how the body was. So, for example, we have some cultures that focused on color therapy. So the way the clothes, the room color would play a role, and it does. Yeah, we know that nowadays, even in the West, they're discovering this. Or, for example, in the Ottoman Empire, music therapy, sound therapy was super important. So there would be certain maqamat that would, for example, help with anxiety or help with fear. And music is bodily, yeah, so to a certain extent. And then, of course, there would be daily practices in this environment. So, for example, every day there would be circles of dhikr. And if you're doing dhikr in a circle, your breath, your vision, your body, there is a synchronization effect. There would be songs, Islamic songs that would promote values, but also bringing the power of synchronization and breathing. And so the cure of the body would be really holistic, but it is really hard to practice this side of Islamic psychology nowadays. So usually what I do is mainly suggesting diet based on the temperament on the person to rebalance that, to advise contact with nature, and few other things that can be done from an online setting or so.
When you say certain things that we can't do, about diet that we can do, what would your advice be on foods pros and cons in good foods and what emotional or mental reaction do they bring about versus foods that bring about a negative one?
Yeah, so in Islamic psychology, we do not really think about the emotional properties of food much, but it is more about balancing. So sometimes we have, for example, a person that, I don't know, is in burnout, right? So this is overexertion. So we would try to suggest foods that are very high in vitality. This is akin to what is in the Chinese medicine. So the Chinese have elaborated a very thorough system in which how nutrition plays with hot, cold, dry, and wet, which is the same system we work with, and also the qi, the vital force, or the quwa nafsaniya or quwa nafsiya, or different types of strength that the human being has. And so we try to rebalance that. It is just something that we try to do with food instead of doing it with speech. Again, keeping with the idea of the door of the heart. But then, of course, there are many other ways in which this door of the heart gets influenced by food. And this is, for example, it being halal or not. That just sounds obvious, but it is really not in places like the West. So there would be that. And of course, there would be also the level of tayyib of a food, because if we're talking about a person that is suffering, we really need to give them the best care possible. So we don't go bare minimum. So we try, for example, to advise for food that is of season, for food that, if possible, has not been produced with, enslaved labor, or there isn't really horrible practices on it, that morally a person feels fine with it, that is local, so it relates back also to their earth qualities of that person in that specific location. So there will be a lot of things to take care of. But again, also this is problematic because I'm not giving them the food. So they need to pay out of their own pocket. We know this type of food is expensive. So it is much more problematic than do it in a hospital setting, which would be the golden standard of what Islamic psychology has been.
We talked about a lot of things so far. We talked about the epistemology or lack thereof of the Western fields. We then cleaned the slate and started talking about it from a Quranic and prophetic perspective, and found it to be very holistic, and that doesn't simply isolate the mind, cannot simply isolate the mind and separate it from behavior and beliefs. And now we're talking about some other sources. We talked about spiritual sources, physical sources. Now you had mentioned gatherings of remembrance, which now leads us to social elements to mental health. Like how to just being social, how does that affect positive or negative mental health? Or can it be a cure?
Yes, it is definitely one of the elements that always have to be present for a complete healing of a person. So social means many things from an Islamic perspective, because the way we see each other is a very complicated network of intertwined circles. So there is the family of origin. If we get married, there is a new family right there. And then there is a neighborhood, which is a very important element, unfortunately, nowadays a bit forgotten. Then there is the mosque, the tariqah, if someone has one. And so these circles are, well, first of all, they are to be, let's say, purified, because in the case of many people suffering from mental health issues, and when they're nafsani in nature, they might have disconnections, but the perception of disconnection is all wrong. So it can be performative. It can be, I really need to show who I am, or it can be even conflictual, like I never forgave my mother for what she did to me when I was small. So it is not just about cultivating relationship. It is also about assessing how healthy those relationships are. Because nowadays, I know it's really hard sometimes to believe in. When I speak to scholars, well, I know they have a very sometimes a lofty view of human beings, or but I think I see something a little bit different. So most people really have a hard time loving their parents. Most people really have a hard time accepting anything in their life, and so. Of course, we need social relationship, but most of the work I do is reconstructing the ones that are already there, unless we're in cases of social isolation or social anxiety, in which you have to really create them anew because they have been destroyed or abandoned. Yeah.
I'm going to give you a little bit of my own commonsensical analysis of, that cup, keep talking, I'm psychoanalyzed. What is that? You know that joke? It's like, keep talking, I'm analyzing you, whatever. Anyway, my own version of it goes in the opposite. All right. So, for example, farmers are rarely depressed and they rarely have a lot of these ailments. People surrounded by water or the beach rarely have these. People who exercise a lot and they're always running and doing some physical activity, they rarely have this stuff. People who are memorizing Qur'an are in very good mental health. People who are optimistic all the time, either naturally or they learned it from somebody to be optimistic. People who are grateful and people who are in service of the poor. I broke it down to these 7. Okay. So therefore, I tend to see that these are the 7 commonsensical sources readily available for everybody to do these 7 things that should, I believe, cure a lot of the major mental and emotional ailments. Forget actual mental disease and junoon. That's like purely medical, but when we're talking about everyday spiritual, mental, emotional ailments, if I don't see them in the majority of these people, when I say farmers, I mean be out in nature. Okay, people along the beach, be out in nature, and so on and so forth. So, what's your comment? What's your reaction to this kind of conclusion?
Well, I agree. You know, I don't think that the mental health of people used to be so bad 150, 200 years ago. And I think that the Western model is really at fault for making people sick in the body and in the mind. We know very well how it makes us sick in the body, right? Nobody would doubt that. And I think in the mind too. And already if we think about the 40-hour week idea, and we think of a family with a mother and a father and children, you'd see how everybody would get sick out of it because there's no way this is going to work. So absolutely, yeah, there are factors and there are lifestyles that are protective of mental health. But most of the time we have people that unfortunately in our community really got stuck on the Western lifestyle and on other issues as well. For example, we adapted to the idea that we need to live comfortably, right? And so you have, 2 cars, the mortgage, the everything. And no, we are stuck because if we feel tired and we feel anxious about our job, what if we lose the job? We finish under a bridge in 5 minutes, right? Well, in the reality, in the traditional lifestyle, it could be, okay, I can take this week off. We're going to eat white rice. What's going to happen? Nothing, right? So you would have a system in which to listen to your body. When you're tired, just take the day off. Or if you have your own business, if you have, you're a merchant. Okay, I'm gonna travel next month, not this month. My baby's being born or whatever. This is what life is about, and how you do not overexert yourself. And we had overexertion already in Ibn Sina talked about. It's not new, right? But nowadays everyone has burnout. And this is because the lifestyle does not make any sense. So I completely agree that there are lifestyle characteristics that could help. But I think that most people in our community really bought so hard the Western dream that now they can't really back up.
Yeah. And interestingly, that I had recently seen an analysis of people's addictions, is that it's really an escape from being overworked and having a standard that's so high that they can't reach, and then being also sleep deprived, so they can't make right decisions. So that's essentially very similar to what you just said right now.
Yes.
So overworking and being sleep deprived is one of the hallmarks of modern men.
And modern woman too, yeah. So this is destructive in different ways across the genders. It is really, and also being overfed and being overstimulated. If you think of the complete absence of silence, where even an elevator has its own ringtone, this destroys mental health. People that still have a little bit of sensitivity, they crave silence. They say, why? I'm just listening to things all my day with music and jingles and I don't know what. So these are small details, but small details in which, the Western postmodern lifestyle really puts together every single negative aspect for mental health and combines them to the max. So what we do is we work until we're so tired, then we have to spend all the evening in front of TikTok just numbing ourselves. And this is so scary, seen from a mental health perspective. It's terrifying.
What's the psychology behind that? Why do people feel that they want to sit on the couch at the end of the day and just go through reels?
Well, I'd say it's the same as opium. Yeah, it numbs you. And when you are so tired, all you want to do is to be numb and not feel the pain and not feel the worry, not feel anxiety. And you can either use substances or use that. I think it's exactly the same, yeah. And people shouldn't just justify it with, I need dopamine, because that makes no sense. Yeah, dopamine is already in your brain and you can use it whenever you want it. It's there. It's no need, doesn't come from TikTok. So there's also a lot of justification to this thing. There is all this idea, I deserve, I worked so hard, let me have my bed rotting day or whatever. These old trends are made to justify something which is as self-destructive as smoking opium in the evening.
When you say dopamine's already in your brain and you can unlock it yourself, how is that the case? How does someone do that?
Well, first of all, a work to feel well balanced and to have this small satisfaction without numbing yourself is really setting a baseline, which I know is the hard work that nobody wants to do, right? But if you every day cultivate a habit of having some quality time with your family and having your children smile at you, that is much more than 5 hours of reels, yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you cultivate a habit of being consistent with your Qur'an reading and with your Salah, and really cultivate the fact that the Salah is the miraj of the believer, that's gonna give you all the dopamine that you need. But it might be that people are blocked on that. They can't because something is wrong in their nafs, in the ruh, in the aql. That is where ilm al-nafs comes to help. But I'm talking ideally for people that have nothing wrong. They should really realize that everything they're craving for can be achieved in a healthy way. So do not give excuses to yourself to, for example, overeat to numbing yourself. This is something we all do in our community nowadays, the overeating part. It is also a way of not feeling hunger, as if it is scary, as if it reminds you of death, of what. So these deep questions need to be asked and no excuses can be made, because these things really are so destructive, then they take over your life really fast.
Do you see a difference between in your patients between those who are in terms of numbers, those who live alone and those who have big normal or just normal families and are always interacting with their families? My guess is that I could be wrong, that most of these illnesses will come, or ailments will come, to people who are more on the lonely side than busy with their families.
Half and half, because I also see a big amount of very dysfunctional families. So families where the relationships are so dysregulated that this is making more harm than good. So it's either that or loneliness. Yeah. I see very few people that have really loving people around them, very few.
Yeah, so that seems to be like one of the greatest cures to everything in life, is to have a group of people that are bound to you by blood, that love you genuinely, even if they are really not great at communicating it or great at even solving your problems. But sometimes just the emotion of being loved so much is, in fact, going to get people over the hurdles that they're going through.
Yes, there are some factors that definitely are very protective. Another thing that I would say, that I've never seen a person that came to me with a problem, because sometimes they just come for advice, but the one that come for problems, nobody ever believed I'm okay with what happened with me in the past. So that's, I think, the beginning of almost all mental, emotional health problems is not having accepted something that happened to you in the past. To some level, not accepting like you're not beautiful enough, not rich enough, what your mother did, or some trauma happened, or not having gotten into medicine at university. Well, these things are the door, because they're Shaytanic in nature. Yeah. And so there are sometimes some of these small things that after you see hundreds of people, you really develop an eye for things that can be very destructive.
In Morocco, they have a famous saying. They say maktub, and they teach that one of the concepts of believing in destiny it has nothing to do with the future, like giving up your future because you believe in destiny, but rather it's a way to explain bad things that happened in the past, that it's Allah's will and there is a wisdom for it. And either it happened to me, then I purely submit that it's Allah's will and it happened to me for a wisdom, or I took part in it and therefore I have to learn a lesson from it. So, I mean, I may have been the cause of it or partially the cause of it. And that's a very simple theology or doctrine and belief that cures what you just said of not accepting something that happened in the past.
Yeah, which I think it is why these things should not be forgotten to be taught to children. Because many times in our community, we do teach children many things. We teach them the pillars, we teach them some of the pillars of faith, but we do not teach them the connection of those pillars of faith to their actual life. And this is one of those things where really you can be setting up your children for failure if you do not elaborate on that.
We're keeping you a long time, but there are a couple more questions. First one, addiction as a disease. What's your take on that? 20 years ago, that was not a concept. Today, it's a very common concept. And something about me says that there's a partial truth to it and a partial falsehood. The partial truth is that, maybe your brain is now rewired, and it needs a major rewiring. But also, it takes a little bit away. It takes away from a person's will, your willpower to change your behavior.
This is a difficult question. I can say that there isn't a concept of addiction as a disease in classical Islamic medicine. Yeah. But there are some scholars that have talked about the difficulty of getting out from addiction. For example, if I'm not wrong, there is Ibn al-Qayyim that says that sinful habits are like chains, a silsila, right? That the soul cannot escape from without either doing jihad al-nafs or like help from Allah. So there is a recognition that there are things that are habits, sinful habits that are very wrong to get out of. But again, as you were making the point before, are we talking about an effect or a cause? The whole idea that, substance abuse or addiction, it is something which you had in theory before, and once an addict, forever an addict. There's no empirical basis on that. Yeah, that's just an idea. Yeah. It can be true, can be wrong, but I don't know. I have no tools to tell you. But what I can tell is that, of course, everything that we are engaging with, which is negative or addictive, every time we do it, it makes it harder to break it. And this is something that I think as Muslim, we should really, really ponder on before we ever make the first slip, because then the second is easier and the third is easier, and so on and so forth. So there could be, for sure, there are biological changes after addiction, especially even if we're talking about pornography, so things that are not substances. There are neurological changes, there are brain connectivity changes. But recently, right this year, they have found neural correlates of phone addiction. So you can't really tell that this person was born in some way, right? It is really the habit that changes the brain there. Yeah. But then, the brain, it is something which has plasticity throughout lifetime. So you can always undo that. So there's no reason to feel it like it is a life sentence either.
A question here from says that recently we heard of the need of more Muslim psychiatrists and therapists in Bosnia, given the tragedy that occurred there and the genocide and there was some 50,000 plus cases of rape by the Serbs. So is it true that there is such a shortage, and hence do you advise young Muslims to enter this field?
Yes, well, I strongly advise young Muslim, both male and female, to enter this field, because there is a huge need, mental health support. And it is also one of those fields where knowing it really helps your daily life, your family life. It is like medicine, right? If you are able to take care of your health and of the one of those around you, this is a really good life skill, yeah. And on the other hand, one thing that I've really seen, and I travel to Bosnia often, I know a little bit the culture there. And what I've seen is that they got out of the horrors of the genocide through also reflourishing of classical Islamic learning and tasawwuf. These have been things that have been so healing on the communal level that they've managed to get out of it without a whole lot of psychologists and psychiatrists there too.
You know what? In terms of people who are tortured and abused, Allah Ta'ala mentions a verse that should be very relevant to Muslim psychologists and therapists when he says, وَيَشْفِ صُدُورَ قَوْمٍ مُؤْمِنِينَ. He cures the hearts of believing people. But with what? What's the context of that? The context is seeing the torturers of the Muslims slain in the Battle of Badr. That is a source of healing. Therefore, justice is a source of healing. And one of the biggest issues in Bosnia was that the war ended, and that was it. The guy who raped you, he's now a painter, or he's now a baker, or the guy who committed all these atrocities as a soldier that was 28 years old or something. Now he's 58 years old, and he's driving a car and having a second family and living his life totally normally. So justice is a huge part of healing. And that's something that never happened in Bosnia.
Yes, and one thing I'm also very worried is nowadays what we're seeing in Syria, for example, where, for political reasons, of course, and there is a solid grounding for the choices that they have done on that aspect of giving pardon, and but psychologically, it's not going to be easy. Yeah,
it's not going to be easy. So how would you fill the void of justice?
Well, again, community work, from seeing what happened in Bosnia, right? Where the revival of Muslim identity, a very organized way of learning and teaching Islam and connecting and reviving their own tradition, rediscovering their songs, their clothing. And it's so beautiful over there. And I really advise everyone that has not been there to go and see the taqiyya, the way they take care of the Sufi lodges there. It is so beautiful, and the love and the care they put in their cemeteries, in their tombs, the artisanship and the craftsmanships. Really, there is healing through art, and Islamic art really speaks to the ruh to such an extent, whether it is going to be sound art or space art or visual art. We can categorize them our own way. We don't care, to call them a certain way. But I think that has power too, because we shouldn't make everything about therapy. It's not the only way to heal. It is one way, and for certain type of people, maybe it is handy, and but there's a million ways. If it was compulsory to go through therapy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have, listed it as a way. But usually what it is talked about is the shifa of the Qur'an, the shifa of the community, the importance of service. And there are even, sometimes you find the odd hadith. For example, there are some about archery for those that have some sadness in their heart, to take up on archery. And that, again, it's something that could be investigated and reflected upon, and the properties of these. So let's not focus only on psychotherapy as the only way to get out of mental and emotional problems.
You've heard of how humans, when they interact with horses, they feel, they're completely transformed. What's the reason for that? What is it about the horse?
Well, I do not know, but I know that someone, and I forgot the author, but he's one of the classical ones, said that as archery has an effect on the akal, the horse has a direct effect on the nafs, and it is like controlling your own desire and learning this connection that you have with those. So it could be that, or it could be some secret that is in the horse that I do not know about. I do not know much more about it, but I know that in Islamic psychology, the Sunna sports are really emphasized as being like channels to open some specific blocks. So they're not just seen, of course, as a Sunnah, they're always seen as a therapeutic tool.
Yeah, there's something about those that I believe is intrinsic. It's just a belief. I can't really pinpoint why, but for example, archery is not the same as shooting a gun. Shooting a gun, obviously, for today, that's what's more practical. If someone's coming to your house, you're not going to pull out a bow and arrow. But there is something about the act of archery that's different. There's something about riding a horse that's different from riding a car. There's something about swimming, like being in the water, must have its own properties. So these types of things, I do believe, but I can't really pinpoint pinpoint exactly what it is, but just a belief, because nothing from the Prophet ﷺ and from the ways of prophets is going to be accidental or just time bound. Even the things that had nothing to do with prophethood in terms of the message, such as being a shepherd, so something related to interacting with sheep, must have an impact on a person. Now, a couple final questions. Can you give regular people who work in the modern world 3 simple daily practices that would elevate a person's mental health?
Okay. 3 simple daily practices. Well, first of all is try to be aware of the productivity culture, because that really kills mental health. So we're not worth for how much output we put in the world. Second step, try to accept as much as possible of what goes your way, the past, the present, or whatever. And try to develop hilm, which is forbearance. Sometimes we think we can't take it anymore, but the reality is that this is just a thought. Yeah, like we deal with pain for people that have practiced. I don't know, I used to do trekking and hiking a lot, right? And after 10 kilometers, you think you can do it. And it's not true, because then after 15 kilometers, you think you can't do it. And it's not true. After 20 years, you have to do the unimaginable to really fall on the ground, because you can't do it anymore. So this type of practices, or martial arts, or really anything where you put your mind and body under a test, you figure out that you actually, in almost everything, emotions, body, words, you can take it. So this is something that as Muslims we have really forgotten. There's really just one wrong word from the mother-in-law, and the world falls apart, and they can't take. It's not like that. We can take a lot, but then we don't want it, because it's all about me, which is the nafs. Yeah. So that's where also the nafs work comes really in handy.
Okay, that's very good. So you said beware of productivity culture, and you said hilm, which is that you can expand your patience and your. I like to visualize patience as a rubber band. The more you pull it, it just keeps getting more and more stretched out. And what was the third one?
I forgot. I'm gonna have to make a new one.
You'll have to rewind. Everyone will have to rewind to get the third one. But we took a lot of your time. Thank you very much. I don't know what time it is in Italy. Maybe it's 10 p.m., which is not good.
It is.
It's 10:30 p.m. So we really apologize for keeping you up that late and keeping you on the stream for so long. But thank you very much, Jazakumullah khairan, and we hope to have you back in the future to talk about these subjects. And thank you for coming onto the stream.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, we back? Okay, so that was really good. I think the subject matter is extremely important. I don't think there's ever been an era where mental health has been this bad. People's mental health, it's extremely bad. And it comes from where people are overworked. People don't have family support. They go home and nobody's there to love them. Nobody's there to distract them, by the way. Sometimes you could view bad feelings, all these things, anxiety, depression, sadness, all these types of things. You could view it like a little goblin that's trying to get you. It can only get you when you're sitting still. Sometimes just being busy is a cure. Think about it. Like when you get home and immediately, boom, there's a dinner. You got to go. You have to eat dinner. When you're eating dinner, 3 different people are talking and there's all these conversations, etc. Then after dinner, someone needs help with homework. Then after the help with homework, you go down for Isha. Then after Isha, somebody needs to be picked up from practice. Then after that, you're going to go and finally sit with the person that you live with, that is your spouse. You haven't seen them all day. And at some point in life, you become almost like colleagues in a factory of humans, right? It's the house needs maintenance, the building needs maintenance, there are bills, there are people. And then there is the middle generation, which has elderly and kids, both. They got both. So they're parenting both sides now. So busy. And sometimes that's actually a great blessing, to be busy, but to be busy doing good things, for people who you love and they love you back. So that aspect of family is really important. The aspect of being overworked, she mentioned that. I think that's a huge thing. People are just, when you're overworked, you don't sleep well. When you don't sleep well, you don't think well. When you're lacking sleep and your judgment's off, you don't eat well or exercise well. It's just a domino effect. And if all that happens to you and you end up, and you're alone at the end of the day, it compounds day after day after day, it compounds. And the way we live in the modern cities, you might not get any sun, you might not get any nature, even if you live in the suburbs. You don't always get nature out in the suburbs. Okay, so all these things, we haven't even touched spirituality, because I personally believe even the mental and emotional health of people outside Darul Islam was probably far better than it is today for people. The way of living was far more conducive to a normal mental state. And that's what we got to keep focusing on, because I think Iblis tries to make us go mad. What does Allah say about the awliya? ألا إن أولياء الله لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. The people who are so near to Allah, they have two attributes. You should never worry about them. They don't have anxiety. When the Qur'an says that, doesn't mean absolutely zero, but the bulk of any anxiety they get is minimal. They don't suffer severe anxiety. And number two, what's the next symptom or the attribute that they have? They don't get sad. So yes, of course, if their child dies, the Prophet ﷺ himself wept for his own sons when they died. His daughter died. 5 out of his 6 children died. And then the 6th one, Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, he knew about her and her father, and her 2 sons would have very sad fates. Prophet ﷺ alluded in many hadiths, one direct, that Fatima will die shortly thereafter. When you know that your daughter's going to die and leave the grandkids whom you love. And your daughter's not going to live a full life to see her daughter and her sons get married. It's a sad thing, right? Then he knows that Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, he's going to die shaheed. Okay. Prophet ﷺ knows that Sayyidina al-Hasan, he's going to suffer in his life. Why else did the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna ibni hadha sayyid? This son of mine is a chief, because he knows people will tear him down. People are going to tear him down and to say, you're nothing. You gave up the khilafah. You're weak. So the Prophet pronounced it. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned Al-Hussein and knew his story and said that he would be killed in a land that is karbun wa bala. So, subhanallah. A lot of suffering that the Prophet ﷺ had. So of course there's going to be sadness. And I just said that the Prophet ﷺ knew that Sayyidina Ali would die shaheed. I can't remember if I got that right. It was on the battle of Uhud, on the mountain of Uhud. It was Umar and Uthman. Sorry, not Sayyidina Ali. And it was Umar and Uthman, because he said, that was Abu Bakr and Umar. Prophet ﷺ said to Uhud, stay still, for upon you is a prophet and a Siddiq and a shaheed. So is there a hadith about Sayyidina Ali's shahada? I don't know, so I can't say that. So unless we go back to that hadith and find it. Nonetheless, the point being is that the people are very close to Allah Ta'ala, are attributed in the Qur'an, have the attributes that they don't suffer from these things. So therefore, Shaytan is trying to fill us with sadness and anxiety. He's the one who's behind this. As Shaytan is described that he yukhawwifu awliya'a. If you're near to him, he makes you afraid. Okay? He tries to create fear, tries to create anxiety, tries to create a world system where you're just working like a rat. You're in a dingy city, so you're away from the sun that Allah created for us and gives us so much happiness, to be honest with you. Just the sun is something that cures people. You're away from nature completely. You're in a factory, you're in a city, you're in an office, you're in front of a computer, an artificial light, everything's artificial. Your food, the food that you eat, did not Shaytan promise to alter the creation of Allah? وَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Iblis said, I will make people change the creation. Is not food part of that creation? What else do we eat? Plants and animals, right? And we drink the water and we breathe the air. So by changing the creation of Allah, ourselves we're ingesting junk and poison, especially in the United States. Then we split up the families. لِيُهْلِكَ الْحَرْثَ وَالنَّسْلِ. What does Iblis want to do? He wants to destroy your crops and he wants to destroy lineage. So the ultimate goal is to starve you and to make sure you just die out. Remember, Iblis hates human beings. He hates humanity altogether. But in the process, it's not going to go from healthy to non-existent. It's going to be poisoned. So the relationships are poisoned. Families are poisoned. And Nasl is destroyed. Father and daughter relationship, poisoned. Father and son relationship, mother-daughter, mother-son, siblings, parents, children, poisoned. لِيُهْلِكَ النَّسْلِ, to destroy the family relationships. As she said here, the two types of people who come, either they're lonely or they have toxic families. They got really messed up families. But people who have normal, good, healthy families, they either don't have issues or they have issues, but they solve it internally. Or they try to solve it internally with their family. They don't go outside the family to discuss it. And you all have normal, alhamdulillah, mashallah, you have normal family lives. The idea that you have an issue and you go to a stranger will be extremely offensive to your mom, right? It will be extremely problematic. In any one of our families, if you have an issue, okay, and then you were to go outside the family, now, is that good or bad? But the point is that why is it problematic? It's problematic because your family, they love you. They want you to come to us. We're the ones who love you. These strangers not going to love you as much as we do. So I recognize there is an issue with that because love does not mean competence. Love doesn't mean they have the solution. So yes, they love you. That doesn't mean they have the solution. In fact, they may be the cause. Someone may love you, may be the cause of all your problems, right? But nonetheless, the point being is that Shaytan's creating a world where work it backwards from how Allah describes the awliya and work it and look at what he tells us directly from Shaytan. Fear, anxiety, destruction of food, crops, and that also means disruption of economy. لِيُهْلِكَ الْحَرْث is the economy too. Riba. Okay, taking each other as gods over one another, because once you are the giver of usury, you are lording over the taker of usury. لَا تَتَّخِذُوا بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Don't take yourselves as gods besides Allah. It's through interest, through debt. And then لِيُهْلِكَ النَّسْلِ, the destruction of the nasl, which is the family life and the lineage. And also, what does he tell us about what is the rijz min amal al-shaytan? It's zina and it's gambling and it's khamr. So when we as Muslims look at things, we look at behaviors as the sources of all this destruction of the human being. Literally, it's just, you could see it, a systematic taking apart. It's a controlled demolition of humanity. That's what's happening through all these facets: your economics, your family life, your food life, your closeness to nature and the creation of Allah, all these things. And that's why any effort in this regard, such as the guest that we just had, Dr. Francesca, it's extremely important to highlight. She's in Italy. I forgot to ask her, but you can look it up. Alif, what's her website? She does have a YouTube channel, probably. Okay, here it is. Let me read that. Istituto Islamico, okay, Avanzati. You already feel good, right? I feel like tomato sauce is about to pour onto a pasta, right? And I'm sitting there in sunny Italy, and I'm about to have some grape juice, because we're not going to have wine, and coffee. And there's people walking back and forth, and the stone buildings we feel good already, okay? Instituto Islamico di Studi Avanzati, okay? Khalas, you already feel good, don't you? Now, by the way, there's a really good thing that she said in another video, which was that feeling good doesn't necessarily mean you're getting better. That's extremely important, right? If that was the case, then everyone who eats chocolate would look great, right? Because when you eat chocolate, you feel great. But Edif, let me scroll down onto that website here, please. Thank you. No, let's keep it in Italian to feel better in Italian, right? Okay. Ana storici corsi per iniziare. Storiale dell'Islam, Islamic stories. Yes. Okay, so go into the English now. Why don't you just turn on Italian TV? You'll feel better as it, or just, the Mediterranean is healing, in my opinion. Everything about the Mediterranean is healing, from Tangiers and southern Spain all the way to Dumyat and Lebanon. Right, all of it.
It's the architecture.
It
has meaning to it.
The architecture that has meaning. That's a great point. It has.
So like atheistic and
Yeah, it's removed from the rest of.
The white box with like windows.
And then when they got better, they just made a tall black box in Manhattan, right? There's just these tall buildings. But everything about the Mediterranean is healing. It's something about that part of the world. I don't know, the way the sun hits it, what they build their architecture with, also the meaning and all the history behind it. Okay, but here we go. Let's see what else we got here. Intermediate course. So she's got courses. You put her website up?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay, that's good. So she's got courses that you can study on. Let's go to the names of the courses. Go up. Okay. Lessons on Islam, History of the Islamic World, the 3 questions. Wait, is that Usul al-Thalatha?
Which every Muslim must understand.
Let's hear it. Let's see. Open that course. What are the 3 questions? In English. There we go.
Yeah, تفسير الوصول إلى ثلاثة المسؤوليات. No, this is why it's not that. But I think.
What are the 3 questions, Alifu? Yeah, this is a scholar from Timbuktu. They are, the 3 questions in the grave. I see. The 3 questions in the grave. Man rabbuk, ma dinuk, wa man nabiyuk. So Ahmed, who? Something at Timbuktu.
It was
Okay, good. Listen, everybody. Omar, I'm gonna send you the Umra stuff because we need.
the flyer. We have it.
Put it up and put the link. Okay, so Umrah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala is coming up in November. So you need to sign up now because spots are going to be limited because I don't like things to be too crowded. So if you want to get a group to sign up, so sign up for our Umrah and put that screen up. Yeah, Omar Alifun, huh? Umrah for youth, but I mean it's called for youth, but everybody can come. But majority is going to be youth. So that's her courses. You could take her courses. What else? Is there any center that they have out there in Italy?
She has. It was called something. What was her center? Go to Press More. They have like dhikr gatherings and stuff. I see in Italy.
Hajib.
That's from Musa, I think, though, right? Because they did a thing with Sheikh Musa and Sheikh. Yeah. Oh, they have a.
Is your mic on, Edifon?
Go to the highlights or something. Because there's like a. There's something here. Look at the first one.
Sign up for Umrah. Come with us in November. We're gonna have a great Umrah.
Oh, you see, that's the place.
So they Instituto di Studi Islamic Avaros.
Yes, it's in Italy. PSN.
Okay.
Search this on Google.
All right. So let's look at some of the questions here before we wrap up for the day. What are the questions? Can I watch Khamza? Khamza is the fighter, huh?
I think you met Khabib with this question.
No, Khamzat is because Khabib retired, right? So Khamzat is the new guy. Okay. If I don't waste a lot of time and I don't replicate hitting the face and don't feel lust seeing awra, the hitting of the face and basically injury generally is forbidden to do and therefore forbidden to make money off of, or to watch, or to pay to watch. So that stuff is unlawful. I hate to break it to you. The grappling is fine, but the actual fight, I'm telling you, as great as Khabib is as a person, I would say, because he is a very disciplined and ethical and strong person. Okay, and he flipped Conor's career on its head through his discipline and his hard work. So you can't take anything away from Khabib, but he did open a door that we have to say is highly, or a lot of it's sinful, right? And Khabib is friends with some of he's actually very close to some colleagues I have. And if I wanted to, I could have pushed them hard to have Khabib on the program. But all I'm going to do is, I can't really have the interview if my main question is the whole field, or the whole concept of MMA has a lot of mashakil. So I can't do an interview without bringing that subject up. And if I bring that subject up, it's, you bring a guest on so that you could give him haraj, right? And sort of handcuff him. But that's my belief. As much as I love I find him courageous, fair, level-headed, disciplined, so many good qualities. Can't swallow the MMA though. Can't accept it. By Sharia, not by me. Right. How can you tell the difference between a grudge and not liking a person? Well, a grudge is something that you think about all the time. Meaning that there's a boiling over of the heart when this person's name is mentioned. Okay? That's a grudge. Not liking something, well, think of something you don't like. Let's say you don't like a certain food. But you don't think about it, and your heart gets all hot and heated and angry when you think about it. Okay? So that's the difference. It's what they call, the ulama of Sharia, the boiling over of the heart. James Connerly says, if I have free will, can I choose to operate from a point of no choice? You already are operating from a point of no choice in what we call the involuntary actions. Your heart's beating, your kidneys functioning, okay? You're getting tired. That's partially involuntary. Your body will tell you when you need to sleep. So, but can I choose to operate from a point of no choice? Yes, Allah has given you certain times and certain ways in which you have no choice. Namely, what is obligatory and forbidden. In a sense, you have choice to do it or not. But if you want what Allah has, then you have no choice. So that's what we call guidance in our religion, that there are certain things, once we've accepted Allah and we've locked in that this is my belief, certain things He's made it so easy in our life. He's taken the choice out of our life. There are so many things that you would spend so much time wasting in your life thinking, should I do this? Should I do that? Or how do I navigate this? Allah gives it to us through transmitted revelation. And boom, there we go. I don't have to think about gender relations. It's one of the things that people spend their entire life getting into one mess after another after another. When Allah Ta'ala says, lower your gaze. When Allah Ta'ala, He said, Umar Ibn Khattab used to say, separate between the breaths. In other words, you should be a distance enough that you shouldn't even hear each other breathe. If you can hear each other breathe, go a little further. Allah made life easy for us. So in that respect, yeah, I can actually study the things that Allah's made very simple for me. He's made the decision for me. I don't want to make a choice. There's a lot of choices we don't want to make. And when people say there were simpler times, usually that means there were less choices and less decisions that we had to make and less ethical problems. Today, when your life is complicated, you have a lot of choices, too many decisions to make, and there are ethical problems. Okay? Allah makes this easy for us. So that's one possible answer to the question. Sheikh Muhammad Jamili holds a different view on fighting, says Adam Bawamia, if you can provide your proof. But that will be his fatwa. What I'm telling you is the ruling. There's a difference between a ruling and a fatwa. The ruling is actually what is known in the text of Qur'an or Hadith. Fatwa is saying, no, that has a context. There's no context for UFC and MMA. There's no dire need to become a UFC and MMA fighter. Okay? Because you're gonna have in it striking, choke holding, etc. It's not all grappling, which is what's permissible. The grappling is permissible. The punching, kicking, and T was saying, and chokeholds and all that. That's forbidden. That's the hukum. If Sheikh Muhammad Jamili is going to bring a fatwa, that's his fatwa only, and he's got to justify it, and he should have his shuyukh support it and add more strength to it. I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but I'm saying it's a fatwa. As is, it's not the truth. Fatwa are never the truth. They are an opinion that XYZ prohibition is contextual, and in this context does not apply. And it will never be just the pure truth. It's an opinion. But the ruling is the origin. Okay? So why would watching it be an issue? Because prohibitions are not just on the doing, but they're also on the watching and the supporting and the strengthening and the paying and everything else. So if something is haram to do, it's also haram to watch, it's haram to pay for, it's haram to spend time on, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Okay, Adam Bawamia, when I said to him, bring me this, he says he has a video, Sheikh Muhammad Jamili, who I believe is a Shafi'i scholar, has a video called Boxing/MMA on Islam Answers YouTube channel. Hafsa asks, why are autism diagnosis more common today? Could it be related to changes in our modern world? Of course, my gut feeling would say yes, it's because of all the chemical changes we've done in the modern world. Hey, why don't we invite Sheikh al-Jamili onto the program, and we can discuss MMA. Okay. Fatwa can be differed upon and discussed without any real harm or adverse effect on the relationship, because they're fatwa, they're opinions. Can you invite Sheikh Asrar Rashid? Yes, we have invited him. He's on the list. We have a lot of invites now that we have an EP, executive producer, Umar. Is it true that a miscarried child will intercede for its parents and lead them to Jannah if they remain patient? I don't know about that in terms of actually that happening. However, for sure we know that if someone was to lose a child and remain patient, the reward for that is immense, and their suffering may be sufficient to wipe out all their sins. It's possible. Can women go to graves of awliya? Women could visit graves, no problem. What they should not do is be part of the burial out of discouragement. It's discouragement for them to be part of the burial. So usually what happens is the women will stand to a distance, because in the burial it's a tight space, and it's a discouragement the Prophet ﷺ didn't want, because it's very sort of harsh to see you putting your relative down into the ground and covering him with dirt. So, but after they're covered in dirt and all the men leave, then the women can come and do a ziyarah. I had a toenail surgery. If I have to do a ghusl, do I do tayammum? No, you would cover that part and just wipe over the casts. You do tayammum when half of your limbs or more are casted up. But as provided you can do more than half or more of the limbs of wudu or ghusl, then you would do wudu and ghusl and wipe masah on the cast. Do you know that what's happening in Gaza today has been mentioned in the Qur'an? It has mentioned in the Qur'an. Listen to this. قضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرتين ولتعلن علوا كبيرا. We warned the Bani Israel in the scripture, you will certainly cause corruption in the land twice, and you will be extremely arrogant. You will reach very high heights. Okay. فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما, when the first rising came, and you disobeyed Allah Ta'ala, what happened? بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا. When the first of the two times came around, we sent upon you some of our slaves of great might and ravaged your homes. Okay. Who was that? Nebuchadnezzar. He's a slave of Allah. He doesn't mean he's accepted with God, but Nebuchadnezzar is the first to make this massive destruction of Israel. ثم رددنا لكم الكرة عليهم. Now the speech is directed to the Muslims. Now you are the ones in strength now. Okay? You are the ones in strength. وأمددناكم بأموال وبنين وجعلناكم أكثر نفيرا. So now after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, now the Muslims ruled over this land, and we're ruling over the Jews as well, and we're stronger than them, and the Jews had no power over them. And then Allah tells the Muslims, إن أحسنتم أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها. If you do good, it's for your own benefit, and if you don't do good deeds, you don't live well, it's against you now. You're going to lose, you're going to suffer, and that's the rule for all nations. فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة. Now when the second promise comes, the second promise is coming in whose time now? The Muslims' time. Because the khitab, the speech of the Qur'an, referred to the Romans doing the first destruction. Nebuchadnezzar and then the Romans and all that. Then, Muslims, you will now be in charge. You will be all powerful, and they will be living in a diaspora under your authority to the Muslims. Now the second rising happens in the time of the Muslims. فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة ليسوءوا وجوهكم وليدخلوا المسجد كما دخلوه أول مرة وليتبروا ما علوا تتبيرا. So here Allah says, when the second time comes to pass, then your enemies, they will come and disgrace you and make your faces miserable. Meaning, they will do such bad things, your face will look so upset. Okay? Your face. لِيَسُوءُ وُجُوهَكُمْ. And that's what we're seeing every day in Gaza. Look at the faces of the people. Okay? This is from the general sins of the ummah and disobedience of the nation. They totally disgrace you. And they will enter the mosque, as Ben Gavir is doing today. Okay? Ben Gavir went to Masjid al-Aqsa, and they prayed. Okay? And utterly destroy whatever falls in their hands. وَلِيُتَبِّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَتْبِيرًا. وَلِيُتَبِّرُوا. They will sow destruction with all their arrogance. However, there shall be mercy here. There will be an end to what we're seeing in Gaza, and what we're seeing of the sucking of resources of the world and silencing the world from this. Not that we want the world to help us. عَسَى رَبُّكُمْ أَن يَرْحَمَكُمْ. It's possible for your Lord to have mercy upon you. How? وَإِنْ عُدْتُمْ عُدْنَا. If you return to good deeds, we return to the good that you were living in. Muslims were living in all fine, no Jews or Christian could bother us, or otherwise. But in عُدْتُمْ عُدْنَا also means if you return to life of sins and disobedience and leave off Sharia, then your enemies will come. Mongols one time, Crusaders another time, Zionists the third time. وَجَعَلْنَا جَهَنَّمَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ حَصِيرًا. Surah al-Isra's opening is about the two rises of the Bani Israel, and the Americans are tasting it now too, because all of their resources will be sucked dry and sent over to Israel, and they'll be poor. Meanwhile, in Israel, they got free healthcare. They study the Torah and don't have to go to school, and everything is paid for. Oh, that's you. Americans are paying for that. I need a second revolutionary war, because they're a colony. You've been colonized from within. it's parasite colonialism. There's in Gaza what's happening, in Palestine what's happening is settler colonialism. You physically went there and took the land. But in America what's happening is parasite colonialism. You came in, look like Americans, get into every industry, get into politics, get into the economic institutions, and then siphon it all for the benefit of Israel with little to no care of the host nation that you're in. That's what a parasite does. He will suck the life out of the host nation. Okay? And I have a rabbi, subhanAllah. Listen to this. Just listen to this. I got to bring you this. Hey, Ed, can I...
Torah time? Rabbi time?
Yeah, this is.
What's his name? What's that?
Hold on. Huh? No, I'm going to send you something. You got to listen to this. You have to listen to this.
They're so open with one guy, Randy Fine. You know that guy?
Oh, he's terrible.
He's
From Florida. He's disgusting. He is disgusting. Terrible. He is why anti-Semitism exists.
He's disgusting. So
Yeah.
You see what he said?
This guy's terrible. Andy. Yep.
In Congress.
Whose WhatsApp is open on the computer? Omar's? Okay, I'm sending to Omar. I want you to put this on. I want to hear it. I want everyone to hear this. Listen to this. Here it is from the horse's mouth. We want the captions. The comments are even better. Straight from the horse's mouths. And he still doesn't get it, though. That's the crazy part. Actually, yeah, skip that part. Yeah, skip that part. Make it a bit smaller. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Cut and play.
Area, right? At some point, the principal is going to tell you it's not the schools.
Rewind it. Instagram is terrible when it comes to
If your child is thrown out from every single school in the tri-state area, right? At some point, the principal is going to tell you it's not the schools. You understand?
Guy's a caricature.
Jews have been thrown out from every single country they ever lived in, besides maybe 5. New Zealand, Australia, America, and maybe another 2. You tell me one country in the world that they weren't expelled from. So at some point, you got to look at yourself and you say, you know what? Maybe it's us.
Oh, come on.
So you become a self-hating Jew?
No.
I understand the process very well. 2,000 years of being thrown out of every school. At some point, you look in the mirror and you say, you know what? I got the issue. You know? If your child is thrown out...
He still didn't get the point, though. Yeah. You're not... It's not self-hating. That's the honest Jew. That is the honest Jew. That's not the self-hating Jew. By the way, I'm doing a research, and I'm going to go on Blogging Theology eventually, possibly talk about this, that the Quranic concept is different. The Qur'an does not judge a people by their lineage. It judges you by your beliefs and your behaviors. Okay? Your beliefs and behaviors. If you have certain beliefs, that's what the Qur'an is talking about. If you have certain behaviors, if you essentially worship your own self-benefit to the exception of everybody else, that's literally what the Qur'an is speaking about. So that this concept of the behavior and the ethnicity being intertwined is a great escape for them. Because when you hate on the behavior, then they say you're hating on our ethnicity. You see, it's a trick. And there was a woman from Israeli lobbies. She says we have a trick. In Europe, if someone says anything, we remind them of the Holocaust. And in America, if somebody says anything, we say it's anti-Semitism. Why? Because when you have a code of behavior and you're a certain ethnicity, then when your behavior goes wrong and people hate on you for it, you say you hate our ethnicity. And the Qur'an is very, very clear. It's about your behavior. And a person who is a Jew but does not have that behavior, they actually have words that are attributes that are praiseworthy. I'm saying attributes that are praiseworthy. Such as what? Such as Allah Ta'ala saying, some of them, if you trust them with a mountain of gold, He'll watch it over for you. Right? So from the people of the book, there are many good attributes. The people of the book are disbelievers who are in a gray area. Pagans on one side, believers on another side. Al-Kitab, there's a gray area. So they have good qualities, they have bad qualities. Ultimately, they're still in the line of disbelievers. But nonetheless, it's going to be the idea here and the concept that I'm going to be talking about in the next few days. It relates to that, the idea of the Jew, the Quranic Jew. It's his behavior and his belief, not his ethnicity. First of all, these guys are Poles and Ukrainians and Khazars, and you can't even take DNA tests in Israel. So they are themselves admitting they don't have the ethnicity. So therefore it's the behavior, huh? Look it up. Look it up. It is illegal to take DNA tests in Israel because none of it's going to show Palestine there. None of it's going to show the Middle East. None of it's going to show anywhere close for these folks. So we could care less about ethnicity. And the Qur'an never judges a people on their ethnicity. You're judged on your behavior. You're judged on your beliefs. So when the Qur'an refers to al-Yahud, it's the people who have those beliefs. The people who waged war on God and said God is stingy. And said Jacob wrestled God. Somebody asked me, they have anthropomorphism. They say Jacob wrestled God. Okay? They have issues with God. They have animosity with God and Gabriel. Now, if you are born Jewish and you say, no, I'm done with this stuff, you could mostly, like, let's say Dave Smith, what's his actual belief system? It's probably liberalism, right? Then he's not a Jew anymore, right? From the Quranic standpoint. Ethnically, he could still be a Jew. But we don't care about the ethnicity of Jews. The ethnic part of it, we don't care.
I can never tell what someone's ethnically Jew, like almost never.
Yeah.
They're wearing something.
But if that guy came walking around, dude, from 5 miles away.
Yeah, no, easy. But that's because of his look and the way he's
Yeah.
But in terms of like Dave
No,
Smith,
you could. I wouldn't know that Dave Smith was.
No, I didn't know he was Jewish. Dave Portnoy.
Yeah, Dave Smith doesn't look Jewish to me. I didn't know he's Jewish, right?
This guy's a textbook example of why we have the mustache.
The mustache. Sunnah of shaving the top of the mustache so that your lip is showing. So here the guy, he follows the logic perfectly, but still makes it a victim thing. The answer is that is the honest Jew. He says, hold on, maybe I'm the issue. How many countries have Jews been kicked out of for their behavior, not for ethnicity? Here's the thing. If you've been kicked out of a country, that means at some point you were let into the country, correct? So why weren't they against you when they let you in? Logic says that, right? They obviously were okay with you when they let you in because you were behaving okay. You just were a poor person who wants a place to live. Then once you got here, what happened to you? When you got here, you started sucking the people's economy out with interest. Elif, we're opening the door today. Elif, I'm about to send you something else. Okay? Get ready. Oh. You're opening this up, Elif. Click. I'm going to send you... This one is a legendary one, to be honest with you. Send you this one. Send you other ones too. I guess it's Torah time again. It's the behavior. It's not the ethnicity. How when the Prophet ﷺ married a Jew, right? He's going to marry someone that the Qur'an curses? And Abdullah bin Salam, radiallahu anhu, he was a Yahudi. Okay? Yes, the ethnicity remains. And if you're ready, click.
Laws that Hitler implemented that not only put him in a different status than everybody else for the rest of history, but also made what's called until this day the biggest financial miracle in history. Who knows the first two laws? Before the Nuremberg laws. Before that, we're talking about years before it. Hitler first comes into power. What's the first 2 laws? Okay, I'll save you the time. Rule number 1. No more pornography. No more homosexuality. None of that garbage. Not allowed. Berlin, in the 30s, in the 20s, was the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. They were the Las Vegas of the day. They were the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. Homosexuality, pornography, all the bestiality, all the garbage of the world, that was the capital of the world. He outlawed it. You're no longer allowed, closed all the bars, all the gay clubs, all the production, which were all run by Jewish people, unfortunately. Second rule. What's the second rule? Second rule was, you're not allowed to charge interest. No more interest. Now, you would think, why? What does he care about interest? Well, because all the people that had the money, that lent the money out, were Jews. He didn't like it. So he said no more interest. Why? Because of the high interest that the Jews charged people was so high, it ruined, it destroyed the economy in Germany. They destroyed, just like they destroyed Russia a few years before that through their communism over there. Jews destroyed Russia, not Goyim. Jews destroyed. Communism is by Jews. Well, don't let anybody confuse you. You look at history, Karl Marx, all the other Reshaim, they're all Jews. Wicked, but nonetheless Jews. They destroyed Russia, and he wrote in chapter 2 of Mein Kampf, they destroyed Russia, now they're destroying Germany, that's why I have to destroy them. Now, this doesn't make he's right, the point is that's actually real, true history. Now, he saw that the Jews are controlling the financial system, and they're charging such high interest, they destroyed the German economy, to the extent that by the time you arrived to go to the store to buy bread, you had to take a whole horse carriage full of money. By the time you arrived at the store, it wasn't enough. Why? Because the inflation rate was so high. The bread became so much more valuable and your money went down. So now he says, what's the cause of this? Because nobody could afford to do anything because the interest rates are so high. So he decided no more interest rates. You're not allowed to charge interest rates. And at that time, the Great Depression was happening around the entire world. Everyone was in a financial collapse. America was a financial collapse. England was a financial collapse. Everybody else was collapsing. Germany collapsed worse than everybody else. But after he passed this law of no more interest, within 6 years, Germany became the leading, wealthiest economy in the world. They called it a financial miracle. Why? They were the only ones that were bold enough to stop interest. This is one of the biggest reasons of why he hated Jews. Because they destroyed the economy because of their greed. Rabotai, it's not making them right. Don't let this confuse you. But this is happening again.
See? It's the behavior. It's not yourself as it. Go to the next one. And watch the behavior of the next one. It's the behavior that infuriates people. And you're going to get kicked out again if you keep doing this behavior. It's not the ethnicity. It's the behavior. This whole ethnicity thing is a trick. Let's go to this Russian rabbi. A Russian priest. And hear what he says. Okay, listen.
In 1941, the Germans forced us to dig a long, deep trench. And after we did what they wanted, they brought a group of Jews and threw them into the trench. And the Germans ordered us to bury them alive. We firmly, these are the Russian prisoners, we firmly rejected this disgusting act. The Germans ordered us to take the Jews out from the trench, and they threw us into the trench instead of the Jews. And they ordered the Jews to bury us alive. We were shocked when the Jews began to bury us without hesitation. The Jews almost covered us when the Germans stopped them and pulled us out, and we were surprised by the German commander who shouted at us, "We wanted to show you, to prove to you who the Jews are. They are ungrateful, merciless, and without love." In 1941...
Again, this is behavior. It's behavior. You're judged on your behavior. Your beliefs about others. What is the Quranic belief? Summary. Sole, single, one belief that is the root of all these bad behaviors. لَيْسَ عَلَيْنَا فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ سَبِيلٌ. We owe no justice to non-Jews. We will not be held accountable with what we do to non-Jews. That's the belief. So once someone doesn't have this belief, it doesn't it matter if his name is Stein or what have you. The Qur'an teaches us it's not a person's anything other than their beliefs and their actions, which is the source of you loving them or hating them. And that's extremely important in light of everything that Maheen Khan's laughing. He said they got Urdu translation too. It's probably made by someone in Pakistan, but obviously it is, right? So, or for Pakistani audience. But that's the point here. When you see a lot of these videos going around, and someone once asked me, well, how do we avoid the language of anti-Semitism? No. You're anti the behavior, not the ethnicity, because they're not even Semites, if we're going to say that. They're not even that. They're all Polish and Ukrainian, mainly. Okay. And some Iraqi, and, because you know who's Iraqi Jew? Mizrahi. Rabbi Mizrahi. Yeah. Is it permissible to marry someone who is from a sect in Islam? It is not permitted, but it would be valid. It's not going to be zina. Permitted, but it's valid. Valid, but sinful. From them is those who make takfir of Muslims incorrectly. Not like one Muslim, he made a mistake. No, make takfir of a batch, that's the action of the Khawarij. To make takfir of someone because of a sin. A major sin that they committed. And from within that is someone who renders, who alters the categories too. Who alters the categories. It's the same thing. Remember Omar when we had Shaykh Yasser on, and he said the subtle difference is that the Wahhabiyya, they didn't make takfir of someone who committed a major sin, but what they did do is they elevated.
They changed the definition of shirk.
Correct. They changed the definition of things into shirk. So ultimately it's the same result. The result is someone who does not deserve to be called a zindiq and a kafir is being called a zindiq and a kafir. And that's the innovation of the mubtadi'ah, of the Khawarij, and anyone who has that belief, we stay away from them. Full stop. Prayer behind them would be valid but sinful. Huh?
It's so Jewish.
Yeah. Yep.
It's changing meaning.
Altering meanings. And on abortion, 120 days is the day where life is deemed to have occurred. Ensoulment, as they say. But in the Maliki madhab, it's 40 days. There's another hadith about ensoulment in which it's 40 days. So the Malikiyya ruled by that hadith. Nonetheless, there are madhabs on the matter, and you can assess which madhab. You can study those. And Salman Yunus had done a very good article on this. Excuse me. Did a very good article on this. And it's 120 days between ensoulment. So you're committing a murder, essentially, after 120 days. You don't have the had of murder. You won't have the worldly punishment of committing murder, but you are taking a life. Before 120 days, it's differed upon based on the reasoning for why someone would do an abortion, would abort the pregnancy. And then to abort a pregnancy could even become obligatory, even after 120 days, if you had to choose between the mother and the child. So, but that's the quick summary. But you can read Salman Yunus's article on that. Okay. What is considered a student of knowledge? I considered a student of knowledge to be someone who focuses on the sources of knowledge first and makes a decision on the sources of knowledge. Alif, go up. I think we passed it. There, go up, up that one. Top. Yeah. I think that's the one. Yeah. Long article covering everything. Okay. Okay. Some of the students from the Dar al-Fuqaha are here. MashaAllah. Dr. Salah defined the talib ilm, the student knowledge, someone who's heart connected to knowledge. I like to look at it from also another perspective, which is that you choose the method and you slowly build. You slowly build. Be someone who reads a lot of Islamic books, to me, is not a student knowledge. Student knowledge is someone who chooses an usul, a methodology, chooses the scholars that they're going to study from, and slowly builds on a curriculum. Finish the first fiqh book of the Hanafi school, second fiqh book of the Hanafi school, third fiqh book of the Hanafi school, and so on and so forth. Okay. Thank you for bringing on such great guests. Alhamdulillah, yes. Dr. Francesca was a very unique guest. I think this is the first person we've had who is a psychiatrist, and I'm totally sort of using psychiatrists and psychologists synonymously, which just because here we're not talking about the medicinal part, we're just talking about the theoretical part, and in that they do, in a sense, overlap a little bit. All right, so yeah, she was a very interesting guest, and hopefully we'll have more such interesting guests on. Omar, who's next on our guest list? Omar's got a lot of guests coming up. Oh, okay. Sheikh Omar Suleiman is coming on. That's reserved or booked already. Alhamdulillah. Muazzam Beg from out of Guantanamo. So we met there at Dar al-Fuqaha in Istanbul. Yeah, I want to just keep it vague. A relative. I don't know what. The relative of Muazzam Beg. And he was in Guantanamo. And this is an amazing story. The guy's guard at Guantanamo Bay, from the amount of time he talked to him, entered Islam. And they're friends now. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, both of them.
What?
Guard on too, on the street.
Both is the guard's coming too.
We'll get him on.
Can you get him? Yeah, get him. I want them both on. Can we watch sports where the aura is open and striking occurs? We shouldn't really. I can't say that we can do that. No, I can't say we can do that. Okay. A couple more questions before we wrap up for the day.
I think this whole related to this Dr. Francesca, what she's doing.
Yeah.
I think just like going into that field and giving the Islamic take on it is such good da'wah in itself, because people are like missing like proper like guidance in psychology, psychiatry. It just doesn't work. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
When people like hear this like refreshing take on it,
I was surprised.
the source of this, and then you tell all this.
I was surprised that the answer on the epistemology of the Western paradigm is not there at all, right? Like I thought maybe she'd say, well, here are the main ideas and these are the sources, but she said no, they're completely, it's not there at all. It's complete shooting from the hip and then building on that. And then I think she mentioned that the psychiatrists and another discipline she mentioned, they even clash, right? They're completely unrelated, and that's one of the.
In psychology.
Huh?
There's a lot of that in psychology. Like somebody later on.
Yeah, someone later on completely flips the theory. So this is not something that can even be refuted, right? Because it completely lacks a coherence. When I say epistemology, it's just a big word for, let's look at things logically. What exists? What is the source of truth? And then we get to methodology after that. What is the method of understanding the truth? Okay. And methodology is what you do after you graduate from epistemology. Epistemology, the first thing, what actually exists? Does the soul exist in relation to psychology? Does the soul exist? Does the soul have a maker? Okay. Imagine your Wi-Fi is not working, and one person's method is, let me just try to figure it out. The other person's method is, wait, hold on a second. The company has a phone number and has a manual. We can read it, right? Which one is going to be more successful in anything, in any appliance that you have, in any computer that you have? One guy tries to go fix it. Hey, do you have any training? No. I mean, let's just pull stuff and poke and pull until we figure stuff out and get a reaction from the machine. Or the other one says, hold on a second. There's a manual. And there's a call number. We can call this phone number and talk to the people who made this device. Who do you think is going to be more successful in life? Question here. Can you watch a sport such as cricket or football? Yeah, you can. Because the knee is not a part of the awrah for us in the Maliki method. You can watch cricket and football. Back to the epistemology, we believe that the person, the human being, has a maker and who's outlined him a path for his wellness. This has got to be like 80% of the study, right? And then 20% is anecdotal beyond that. And I call that the earthly spirituality, earthly wellness, which everybody can tap into. If you have a fair mind and a decent fitrah, you're going to feel better when you're loved by people. You're going to feel better when you eat well, when you sleep well, when you get in nature, when you exercise. Believe it or not, there's a guy here, he always tells me, and he's hooked on one thing here. He says sweat is so important. He said, when you work, and he tells me why I feel good, every day I work hard and I sweat. So I sweat out my toxins, he says. Okay. And I think that's like probably true, right? That is literally probably true. H. Chaudhry has it even better. Ontology, what exists. Epistemology, how do we know anything is actually real or true? And then methodology. So that's to break it down even more properly. The ontology, what exists. Then epistemology, what is the source of truth? And how do I know something is absolutely true? The other day, a good willing brother, he says, Shaykh, I don't get it. I'm completely confused why these madhabs say one thing, but the hadith is sahih, says another thing. I said, brother, just by being sahih does not mean that there aren't other sources of hadiths or verses or actions of sahaba or tabi'een that won't also be weighed in the scales of what to do. See, the mistake that the young brother made is that just because it's sahih means you act upon it immediately. Well, no, sahih means that it is a valid piece of evidence, but it may be one out of 5 pieces of evidence on a certain subject. The Prophet said X. Okay, but in another hadith he may said Y. Yes, this hadith is sahih, but it may be sahih with 2 chains. This is sahih with 10 chains. Okay, this may have, there's another factor. Which came first and which came second? The Prophet ﷺ said this, he said X, and it has 10 chains, and they're all sahih. The Prophet said Y, or opposite of X, negative X, and it has 10 chains too, and they're all sahih too. So we ask which one came first and which came second? Or which one was restricted to a circumstance and which one was general for all circumstances? Okay. There's mutlaq and muqayyad, khas and am. Okay. General and specific. Restricted to a circumstance and not restricted to a circumstance. Nasikh and mansukh, abrogated and abrogating. Which came first? Then the Prophet may have abrogated it. So the idea of the word sahih, it has it covers one aspect, that this piece of evidence is sound. It is a piece of evidence. But it doesn't mean that it is the only piece of evidence. And that's why we have jurisprudence. In any commonsensical situation, if there's a brawl out in the street, and I catch one kid, and I say to him, hey kid, what happened? And he tells me what happened. Is that what happened? No, it's not what happened. That's the one piece of information on what happened from one perspective, from where he's standing, given who he knows and who he doesn't know. Then I'm going to, if I really want to get to the truth and I understand methodology, I'm going to go to another person and ask him, and then a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, and maybe ask everybody what happened from both sides of the fight and the onlookers, from one side of the street and the other side of the street, from street level and from the balcony. Then you put all the data points together and you're going to get a dominant theme. And then that's most likely, if not 100% to be the truth. Could be 100% to be the truth. Okay? So that's why when we see the word sahih, it does not mean that that is the only possibility, because there could have been other piece of evidence. And that subject matter is called usul al-fiqh, or methodology. Okay. Extremely important for everyone to understand. What's the question here?
Apologies, it's a bit off topic, but do you have one piece of advice for somebody moving towards reversion, reading
Someone moving towards becoming a Muslim.
They're saying they're reading the Qur'an and the Sura at the moment.
Okay, I have a very simple thing to you. My piece of advice to you is to focus on one question. Is it true that Muhammad is a prophet? You don't need to study all the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, unless you're answering that question. Okay? That's the only question that matters. Because if the answer to it is yes, he is a true prophet, then you've also accepted God. Because that's what the prophet is coming with. And once you come to the answer, or the answer to the question that yes, Muhammad is a prophet, then give him his dues. And he's telling you what his dues are. The dues are to believe and to say there's only one God and Muhammad is his messenger. Give Muhammad his rights. Everything else, and give God his rights. Everything else, you figure it out later. Okay? And a lot of people are really, they stop almost maybe even entering Islam on the age of Aisha. You know that the age of Aisha is not a doctrine in Islam. If a person says to me, and I talked to Dr. Hatim al-Hajj about this, and he actually brought it up to me. If a person says to me that I refuse to believe she was 9 years old, and I'm going to go with that she's 27. You can live and die with that belief. No one's going to, that's not going to affect anything. The only thing you can't, we would not accept somebody to say that, accuse someone else of lying. That you can't do from the hadith transmitters. But let's hypothetically say somebody said, I'm going to live my life and I'm going to enter Islam on the condition that Aisha was 27 years old. Okay. I say your Islam is valid. That your Shahada is valid because that's not a doctrine of faith. On top of that, it's an ahad narration in the first place, even though it is Sayyidah Aisha's own words. Okay. But nonetheless, it's an ahad narration. It does not affect whether you are a Muslim or not. I don't want to say the word irrelevant. Imam Bukhari is not going to put something irrelevant in his book. Okay. Another thing on Imam al-Bukhari that many people mistook. To say that al-Bukhari came at a certain time period and another scholar such as Abu Hanifa came before him. When Bukhari writes his hadith book, he did not discover new hadiths as if it's a scientific discovery that didn't exist before. No. He collected hadiths that were already in circulation, that were well known. They were well known hadiths. But the reason his book is the greatest hadith book and the most authentic book on the earth after the Qur'an is that he checked and triple checked all of the chains of transmission to the point that there were no discussion on them. And there was only one scholar who brought up any discussion, and he discussed 4 hadiths of Bukhari, and even later on Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said Bukhari was right on that. So when we say it's authentic, it does not necessarily mean all the jurists are bound by those hadith for the reasons I said earlier, which is that, yes, these evidences are authentic, but another scholar may have a weightier evidence. And that's why they're not going to act upon it. Yes, they believe it. They accept it. They hold 100% it's an authentic piece of evidence, an authentic hadith. But they view another evidence to be stronger than that. And that's primarily the case in the Hanafi and the Maliki madhabs, who hold al-amal al-mutawarath in Kufa, the action of the people of Kufa, the Sahaba and the Tab and their students, and in Medina, al-amal, amal ahl al-Medina, for Imam Malik. And who originated this concept of Amal Ahl Medina? Did Malik invent it? It was taught from Malik by his teacher, Rabi'atul Ra'i. Did Rabi'atul Ra'i invent this concept? No. Do people, you know that the concept of Amal Ahl Medina originates with Umar ibn Khattab. He is the one who said, O people, meaning those who come to us from Egypt, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Bilad al-Furs, whatever. You coming to us from outside of Medina, and you bring us a hadith, first examine if we here in Medina act upon that hadith or not. And that's a quote that can be found in Qadi Iyad from the khutbahs of Umar ibn Khattab. And the concept of Amal Ahl al-Medina is basically that there are multiple sources of knowledge. Yes, you have a hadith, but that hadith could have had in it It could have come earlier, and then the Prophet says something else later. It could have meant something specific, and you think it's general. Okay? And so on and so. It could be on a certain condition and circumstance, all right? And you thought it's absolute. So Umar is saying, look at us here in Medina. We are practicing the Sunnah. We're living by the Sunnah. Examine your hadith against our practice. If you see us doing the opposite of it, then leave off that hadith. Am I abandoning the Prophet ﷺ and contradicting the Prophet for follow Umar? No. That there is an explanation behind it that you may not know, and it could probably be explained, such that it was mutlaq, or it was muqayyad, or it was khas, or it was mansukh. Just to give three examples, the three examples that I mentioned earlier: abrogated, or conditional, or specific. So Umar ibn Khattab is the one who came up with this concept that when we see a solitary chain hadith, only a few chains of narration, we can verify it by looking at how the people who understood and lived with the Prophet, peace be upon him, lived and died with the Messenger. Every day they were visiting him, living with him, traveling with him. Do you think they're not going to know how to live Islam? So compare it. Okay? Compare it with their actions.
John was saying the Prophet was ever a problem for himself.
John is saying that believing in Muhammad, being a prophet, is never a question. And that's a great way of looking at it. And that's the only thing you need to worry about, because that's the core of the issue. And God will judge a person firstly on if they gave the simple dues to the truth, which are, you believe in one God, then say it. You believe Muhammad is a messenger, then say it. But you only have one condition to make sure that you or nobody else will lose life or limb because of you saying it. That's the only valid excuse to keep it to yourself. It could be possible that, let's say, if you enter Islam, your dad says, you are going to get the beat down of your life. You don't even know what's going to happen to you. I'm sure that's said to a lot of people. That person, he has the option. He can avoid the punishment, keep the shahada between him and God. Yeah. And tell everybody or anybody who the Prophet, peace be upon him, that your father won't know. So at least in sight of God, you gave your testimony of faith to far away from people from your dad, just as an example. Okay. But other than that, you can learn everything later, but you have to give your dues. A brother came to me in Islam. He said, I don't know if I need to really know I can practice Islam before entering Islam. I said, this is not a type of, it's not a type of course, right? That you have to know if I can do it, because you don't have to do all of it right away. It's not an obstacle course that I got to know before I enter this race if I can do it. But what you need to do is you need to give God his dues. Have respect for God and his Prophet. And that's how they told us to respect them. Shahadatain. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Is it true Imam Malik's teacher was Ja'far as-Sadiq? Yes, Ja'far as-Sadiq was the teacher of Imam Malik. When I said to my Shaykh, why didn't he narrate from him, he got very upset. He said his whole fiqh is from him. Right? Is a hair transplant halal? It is halal. What is the remedies against waswasa in cleanliness? Someone has OCD, probably, maybe medication and ignoring it, but you probably might need medication. Where does it say?
Future spouse is doubts about Sharia law because she doesn't study Islam properly as in the fiqh. Am I allowed to marry her, or is she apostate?
She's doing what? Future spouse has doubts about Sharia because she doesn't study properly as in the fiqh stuff. Is she an apostate? You're an apostate in Islam if you willingly and openly renounce the identity of being a Muslim. And you're a zindiq, which is also pretty bad. You can't marry a zindiq. If you say, yes, I am a Muslim, but I don't believe in something known in religion by necessity. Things that every child would know. any child raised in an Islam, ask any 10-year-old boy, girl raised in an Islamic environment, and that they would know these things, because that's literally the definition of Islam. So you can't say I am a Muslim, but I negate the definition of Islam. That doesn't make any logical sense. Then your marriage to them will be fornication. And then anything less than that will be in the category of heresy, or we could say innovation. Then you're, at the very least, your marriage would be valid. You may have issues in the future in your life getting along with her, but it would be a valid marriage. All right, last call reminder to everyone for the Umra program that we have, Umra trip that we have. You can, last guy, Mustafa Siddiqui, ruling on sleeping after Fajr, lightly discouraged. And some people even say that it actually makes you more tired. But what you should do is wait, see when is Fajr out, add 20 minutes, then you could take a nap after that. Can women watch sports of male players if the aura is covered? Yes, they can. How do I know if someone is hiding their belief, etc.? Okay, the main issue is for one-upped, your main question. I don't want to actually name the sex that you're talking about, because some people get overly excited when these names get thrown out. But it's the tajsim. If a person negates that any bodiliness for God, then they're not what you're talking about. Anthropomorphic. Negating about, and we have to, is the jism and the jasad is known to be negated for Allah Ta'ala binas al-Qur'an. Okay, al-jasad binas al-Qur'an, wal-jism bil-ma'na. The jism can mean a body, any physical thing, and it could mean something that exists on its own. As for something that exists on its own, of course, we know that is the God's attribute. But what we refer to here in the Aqidah books, the jism is that which is of a physical nature, that takes up space, that has a right and a left and a top and a bottom and an inside and an outside, and exists in a location. We say that must be negated for the Creator. Ladies and gentlemen, long stream. We didn't have stream for 3 days, a whole week last week, all 3 streams. And today we had a great guest, but we will sign off right now. Jazakumullahu khairan, everybody. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa aminu salihat. Wa tawasaw bil haqq. Wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullah.
Aşkınla arasında yıldızlar kadar titredim. Uzat şarabından için şu canı aşkla versin var. Ya kalbe şifa ver Allah.